Hey guys, it's Rebecca. Welcome back to my channel. Let's talk about the books I read in July. Alrighty, so first up is The Girl from Widow Hills by Megan Miranda. I gave this book 4 stars. I'd like to give some trigger warnings for child endangerment, traumatic experiences / PTSD. I will say Megan Miranda handled Olivia / Arden's growth really well. Well, let me tell you what it's about. So it's about this girl. Her name is Arden Manor. We meet her as an adult and she's going by her middle name, Olivia. She is the girl from Widow Hills, which is meant to be a news story that happened in, I think they're in like Tennessee or Kentucky or somewhere, and she basically is found trapped under this storm drain, holding on for dear life, hoping to be rescued because she had been sleepwalking and was swept away through a flash flood. And so you kind of follow her after, it's 20 years after the fact, so I think she's like late 20s, early 30s, and she's made a new life for herself. She doesn't go by Arden anymore so that people, you know, don't figure out that she's the girl from the story of Widow Hills. But the 20th anniversary of the storm and her rescue is coming up, and she's worried that the media is going to resurface. They're going to find her in her new space. She moved to a small town hours away, trying to, you know, start a new life for herself. She doesn't tell anyone about her past, but she's worried it's going to catch up to her. And when we see her, she is sleepwalking again, and she has it in years. And one evening she wakes up outside and there's a dead man at her feet, and she like trips over him, and that's how she figures out, like, holy crap, there's a dead guy in the yard. And so we just kind of figure out, or we follow her as she tries to figure out, who's this guy? How did he get here? Did I kill him? Did someone else kill him? What's happening? It's kind of a wild ride, honestly, but I enjoyed it. I would say it's one of Megan Miranda's stronger novels. She's definitely hit and miss for a lot of people, and she's like that for me too. And I feel like she did really well with this story. So after that, I read Saving Ruby King by Catherine Odell West, which was actually sent to me for an Own Voices review by Harlequin Publishing, which I really appreciate them. Thanks so much, guys, for sending that to me. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was fantastic. I've seen a lot of criticism about it, not so much like in the content or anything, because Catherine's a fantastic writer, but more so in the way the story develops. Personally, I took the title at face value. When I saw Saving Ruby King, I didn't really think it would be as much about not about Ruby, more so it would be about people trying to save her. And that's exactly what we get. So if you look at it from that perspective, I think it, you know, it does everything it's trying to do. So let me give you the backstory. So there's this young woman, Ruby King. She lives in the south side of Chicago, and her world is basically her family. She's kind of estranged from her home church. Her mom was going to the church all the time, was volunteering there, doing their accounting books. And basically one day her mom dies from what appears to be possibly a home invasion. They're not really sure, and we're kind of in the aftermath of this. So Layla is Ruby's best friend. She's incredibly worried about her because she knows that Ruby's father is a piece of shit. He had gotten out of prison and appears to the rest of the, you know, neighborhood that he's like this family man. Like, they know he's had a rough past, but they think, oh, he's turning his life around. Like, he, you know, bought the bakery from the guy that retired and is, you know, putting money into the community. But what we know is that he actually regularly abuses Ruby's mom, and Ruby just can't stand him, and the people closest to her are afraid for her, and she, and actually there's a trigger warning here because she actually attempted suicide before the book opens, and so we find that out from Layla, that she's absolutely terrified that either something's going to happen at the hands of Ruby's father, or, you know, at her own hands. So we basically really follow Layla and Layla's dad and Ruby's dad. Ruby's dad is the the baker, and then Layla's dad is a pastor of the church. And the church actually has its own chapters, which I thought was really cool because it is a staple in not only this community, but in this kind of, I would say, found family. When we get into the book, like, it's all established, but obviously Layla and Ruby are best friends. They've grown up together. Their dads grew up together, and then their grandmas knew each other. And so we get to see this like 3-layered story and see, you know, how did we get here? Why are the families where they are now? Why do they behave the way they do now? And it's honestly a really incredible look at a different kind of story about Black families and the importance of church in the Black community. It is very common, even if you're not super religious, to have some ties to church, whether you actively go now or you did in your childhood. It is a very big part of Black families in America. And I think right now, a lot of readers have been asking for stories of different Black experiences rather than just talking about, you know, the quote-unquote struggle. And I think this gives this to us. I think it shows that Black people can have a hard life but know how to lean on each other, and it's in a different way than we're used to seeing in books. And I just think it helps show that being Black isn't one-dimensional. We don't all experience the same things. What may be one person's truth isn't another. And I don't know, this is a fantastic debut novel. Like, I cannot give Catherine Adele West her flowers enough. Like, ma'am, you came out the gate just swinging, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. And I hope she gets the full support of Harlequin on whatever her next book, you know, adventures are. So with that, let's move on to the next book. So book 3 in July was The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa, which is about a woman named Carolina Santos who is a wedding planner who gets left at the altar as the book opens. And her groom is, honestly, he's a coward. He not only leaves her at the altar, he doesn't tell her to her face why. He texts his brother after he's left the, you know, groom's suite. Like, he leaves super early in the morning. His brother has no idea why, no idea where he went, and he looks at his phone and he has a text from his brother saying, "Hey man, all you stuff you said last night really clicked. I can't marry Lena. Tell her I'm so sorry. See you later." Like, sir, what are you doing? And so it's kind of that aftermath, which, you know, it's a romance, so obviously there's very clear possible enemies to lovers here, because Lena, being the wedding planning she is, gets this incredible opportunity at a different wedding that she's working, where a woman who's related to the groom in that wedding notices Lena and just the way she's handling, you know, difficult situations that are coming up. The bride has no idea what's happening, and, you know, if you've ever been a part of a wedding party or the intimate details of watching a wedding come together, you know how important it is to, like, try to keep everything going as smooth as possible, and Lena's a master at that. So she says, "Hey Lena, I've taken over the reins of my family's hotel chain. I want us to be a destination for weddings, and I want you, along with someone else I'm considering interviewing, to come on and basically do a trial run and a presentation for me, and I'll decide who I think should be, you know, the wedding planner for our hotel chain." And so she's like, "Oh my God, this is an incredible opportunity." She has actually just lost her office space in DuPont Circle. There's a man in her community who is great friends with her family, and he runs a bridal shop that she leases some office space out of from him. But their owner of the building is like, "Hey, we're, you know, rent's going up." And he's like, "Man, I can't keep up with these prices, and, you know, I'm not selling as many dresses as I used to." And he's like, "I'm sorry, Lena, you're gonna have to find new office space." So getting this opportunity would just take care of all of her problems. But she walks into the room to meet with the marketing consultants, and it's the brothers, the one who left her at the altar and then the one who told her. And she has to work with one of them, and the other one's gonna work with the other organizer, and they're gonna duke it out. And so that's kind of where we're left off, and we know, like, something's gonna happen here. And I think Mia Sosa handles it so well. She does not beat around the bush when it comes to the hard questions. Each character asks, you know, those really hard questions. They start to learn each other, try to really understand each other. And it's a romance, so some romance ensues. How far it goes, you'll just have to read it. Oh, by the way, I gave that 4 stars. And after that, I decided to switch it up and read some nonfiction, and actually read the audiobook of this because the author reads it himself. And it's I Can't Date Jesus, Love, Sex, Family, Race, and Other Reasons. I've put My Faith in Beyonce by Michael Arsenault. This was his debut memoir, and it's literally just that. It's a bunch of essays about love, sex, family, race, and he talks about Beyonce a lot, which, like, as a, you know, stan, beloved member of the Beehive, we love Michael Arsenault, and yeah, I feel that 100%. So I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed his essays. Some of the transitions were kind of like, they were just hard cut, and you could tell, like, at certain points, like, they were kind of flowing and then they weren't. But I mean, he talks about some hard things, like being a gay man in the South, and, you know, growing up through high school and feeling like he's supposed to like girls, but none of the girls like him, and really struggling through that. But I think he does such a great job about talking about what it means to come into your own. And he also really challenges, and I love that he talks about, like, He Literally Can't Date Jesus talks about church, because I also am very removed from church at this point. Like, it as a building and the people, like, I'm just not there. It's not my thing. But, you know, I still feel like a connection to God, and he's kind of in that same space. And so it was really refreshing to see someone take such a strong stance and going, like, no, I know what I believe in, but the way y'all are doing it over here just isn't for me. So I really appreciated that. So I would say it's not super churchy, not super preachy. I know sometimes, you know, you get into memoirs that have a faith aspect and you're just kind of like, where's this gonna go? So yeah, it does very well on that. So definitely recommend that. And then I read my second Christina Lauren book, and that was The Honeymooners. And this one, similar to Mia Sosa's The Worst Best Man, is circled around the wedding. But this time the wedding does happen, and the sister of the bride, is the twin sister, goes on her sister's honeymoon that she has won and will be lost, can't be rescheduled if no one goes, with the groom's brother. They go together because everyone but the two of them gets, like, insanely ill from seafood at this wedding. The only reason that Olive doesn't get sick is because she's allergic to seafood, and the groom's brother, whose name was Ethan, he doesn't get sick because he doesn't eat at buffets. It's just a thing he has. And so literally everyone else is literally sick for weeks. And it's like a 10-day honeymoon to Hawaii, all inclusive, but they have to go, and she has to pretend to be her sister Amy when she gets there. Fortunately, they're identical twins, so you know, they go through and do that, but they can't stand each other. But it's not, actually, I feel like that's very strong. They have a dislike of each other, and they both can kind of tell that their dislike of each other, like, they're, like, not really sure why it started. Like, there was no clear, like, oh, we had a fight, or he said, you know, I'm gross, or she said I'm a douche. Like, there was no clear start of their dislike for each other. Olive has her perception of what happened the first time they met, and Ethan has his perception of the first time they met, but, you know, neither of them are right in their assumptions. And so as we go through the book, we will learn why they believe what they believe about each other, how that affects the two of them. And again, Christina Lauren writes romances, so obviously some romance ensues, but the question becomes, how far does it go? I think that they handled this super well, as far as, like, the move from enemies to lovers vibe. I feel like it was very well done and realistic to me. There are some very tough things that happen in this book, but I personally didn't feel like there was, like, oh, they clearly wrote themselves the easy way out to make the plot move, which I think is something that happens super frequently, so it's really great to see that not happen. So next up is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. If you haven't heard what this one's about, basically there is this wedding happening on this island. I think it's in Scotland, or, like, off of Scotland, somewhere up there in the UK. And it's kind of this very eerie, Ireland. It's just this very eerie island, and it gave me mega Agatha Christie vibes in the best way. So if you're looking for a modern version of like an Agatha Christie style story, I 100% recommend this book. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I feel like the ending of them tying everybody together and kind of just like the vibe in the end was a little rushed, and that's why I docked it a star. But basically, everyone's at this wedding, someone's ended up dead, and you're trying to figure out who killed them, who had motive. If multiple people have motives, okay, which one did it, like what happened? And I don't know, it was just really good. I listened to the audio and I couldn't stop. I listened to this book in 2 days, and the only reason it took me 2 days is because I had to go to bed the night before because I'd work the next morning. So I definitely 100% recommend that. And also the next book I read, and I did both of these for the reading rush, so if you saw my TBR video, you're like, why am I hearing about this again? Wrap up time. The next one is The Switch by Beth O'Leary. This, unlike her first book, is not inherently a romance. It focuses on a grandmother and mother who decide that they're gonna switch lives. The grandmother kind of lives out in the country in England. The daughter or granddaughter lives in London. And they're both kind of just hitting these points in their life after a traumatic event that was mutual for them, and there's a death in the family. And that's not a spoiler, it's like right in the very beginning of the book. There's a death in the family that shocks, not really shocks both of them because the person had been sick for a while, but like it shocks their world, shocks their system in the way that like, even when you know it's coming, it's still super hard. And they both are just kind of hitting like walls just in their personal lives. And the granddaughter, Lena, has gotten a paid leave from work after she kind of has just like this panic attack before a huge presentation, and it's clearly stemming from her grief and then the mix of stress with that. And her boss is like, listen, we're not firing you, but like you need to step away, get yourself together, take care of yourself, you know, we'll see you, you know, in a few weeks. And so then she recommends to her grandmother, who is talking about, you know, wanting to find love, doesn't want to be alone. She's 79. And so Lena's like, well, there's plenty of eligible men in London. Like, why don't we just switch lives for a couple weeks? And so all of that ensues, and then they both get to deal with their trauma, but also get to learn more about themselves during this period of time as well, and I really enjoyed that. So obviously trigger warnings for death in the family, but also for mental health, but it's handled very respectfully. Alrighty, and then to round out my reading rush TBR, I read Wuthering Heights, gave that 4 stars. I hadn't read it since high school, and even in high school I think I got about halfway through and I just didn't bother with it anymore. I like read enough to do whatever assignment I had to do it for school. But I really enjoyed this. Like most classics, I just feel like once you know, have some life experience, they tend to have more value, and that's kind of what happened for me. It's about Wuthering Heights, which is a building or house. And you follow these 2 families that kind of are intertwined, and it's very much learning the history of these families. Why are they the way that they are? Why are their relationships the way that they are? And you know, to me it was a really great story about love and loss and what unrequited love looks like. And maybe not even quite unrequited, because unrequited tends to mean that one party has no interest. Whereas in this one, both parties had interest, but because of the time, there was a decision made that had more to do with like, well, what's it gonna do for me and my comfort of living and things like that. So it's kind of intense, and I will say, if you're just reading it off the page, it can be a little hard to follow because it was written in like the 1700s, but I did it through audio, and something about hearing it in like a specific cadence really helped me stay like engaged in the story. So like I said, I gave that 4 stars, really enjoyed it. And then after that, I decided, you know what? I'm gonna throw it back. Pandemic's happening outside, it's making me kind of anxious. Why don't I read about post-apocalyptic things back when that was all the rage in YA? So I reread the Hunger Games series. And I would just like to apologize for Suzanne Collins, because I compared Mockingjay, unbeknownst to me, to the last book in the Divergent series, which was absolute just abysmal garbage. And I don't know why I thought that, because I loved Mockingjay. So let me just get that out of the way. I gave all 3 books 4 stars. You should know the synopsis at this point, but if you don't, for some reason, or if somebody's reading this and like watching this in like 2050, The Hunger Games. It was all the rage. It's how Jennifer, what's her name? Jennifer, I was about to say Jennifer Lewis, but whew, let's not mix up the mother of Black Hollywood into this. I forget, I'll put a little asterisk. Jennifer whatever, she was one of the many Jennifers of the time. There were like 5 that like were getting all of the jobs. You see her and Bradley Cooper a lot and things together. But anyway, she becomes Katniss Everdeen for the movies. I think I'm gonna rewatch them. I've only seen the first one, and that one did pretty well with its adaptation from the book, but I didn't watch the first or second 2. But Katniss Everdeen is this girl who lives in District 12, which is within the, I guess, state of Panem. I don't know if it's a state or a city technically. Basically, there was, it's basically like the after. Terrible things happen, the districts are what's left. Each of them focuses on a crop or what's the other word I'm looking for? A skill set, if you will. Like District 12 focuses on mining and coal. Another district's known for their like baking and like bread. Another one's known for what they do with like cotton, like just things you need to run a society and keep people clothed and fed. And then there's the capital of Panem, where like people are painfully rich and gluttonous and wasteful, and they hold the Hunger Games annually to commemorate the awfulness that happened before they were the districts, so that the districts never forget why they are where they are. Anyway, Katniss enters the Hunger Games as tribute for her sister Prim, who is 11 or 12, which is the youngest age that you can be entered into the Hunger Games, and she's like, absolutely not. I'm going in there for her. And we just follow her from that. From her very first Hunger Games into the second book, and the third and so on, and just watching her take on what is meant to be this like cemented, I'm gonna say regime. It's one man, but as we know from history, that's all it takes to fuck everything up. Of her following him and him following her, and she can't stand him, he can't stand her, and you know, just shit happens. It was a great reread, super fast. Honestly, I probably could have read them all in 2 days, but I was working, so I read them in like 4. I forgot how short they are. Excellent reread, 10 out of 10 recommend. And then I went to The Lovely Ladies of My Favorite Murder, Read Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered, a how-to guide, or the definitive how-to guide, which is obviously by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. If you're not familiar with their podcast, comes out every Monday and Thursday. Thursdays are full episodes. Mondays are mini-sodes where they basically read our emails right back to us, where we share our hometown stories. But I enjoyed it. I listened to it via audio because obviously why would you not want to hear Karen and Georgia tell their own life stories? And I think it reminds me specifically of like just how far they've come since the beginning of the podcast, and that their lives weren't glitz and glamour before it. I am in some of the like online groups that are like just spin-offs of the podcast, where like people who love the podcast but are also fans of other things tend to be in these groups. And there's often a lot of complaints about the two of them, and like obviously they're by no means perfect humans. They are 2 privileged white women who live in LA. Shit goes wrong. It just does. But listening to how like hard, honestly, like their lives were before, like Karen often talks about, even outside of this, like her mom had Alzheimer's, and watching that disease just take her mother from her. And then with Georgia, and like she struggled with, you know, addiction and just self-worth, and the trauma that happens when you have a manipulative parent who also dealing with divorce and then living with the manipulative parent. And it was just a lot of things that I think are relatable to us. And so it was just nice to see that from a standpoint of comedic vibes, and that's how they approach murder, you know? It's like a coping mechanism for a lot of us is laughter, is joy, even when things are incredibly terrible and terribly hard. And so I just, if you need a refresher of, you know, people who just came out on the other end successful after something terrible, I think it's great. And because it isn't short essays, it's very easy to pick it up and, you know, read a little chunk at a time and read little sections. They have them kind of themed off of sayings from their podcast. Like, I think the beginning's fuck politeness, and then there's like, call your dad, you're in a cult, stay out of the forest, all those, you know, fun sayings that they have. So you can kind of follow along those sections. And that's what I did, because I use this as a palate cleanser for the next book that I finished this month, which is wild that I read this book in basically 2 weeks for not only how long it is, but just how heavy. And that is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Wow. I gave this book 5 stars. Like, let's just start there. I loved this so much. And as you can tell, I listen to a lot of true crime. So for me, it didn't feel wholly like the trauma porn most people complain about it to be. I'm not saying that it isn't. I guess that because I often will, you know, consume that kind of content so frequently, it didn't hit me as hard. For me, it felt like a well-developed story of understanding, like, just Jude and everything he went through, and that it's not always a pretty bow in the end. My camera's about to die. I'm just gonna pause it right here. Okay, sorry guys, my camera died. I'm back. So, just 2 books left. Second to last, and certainly not least, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. It was fantastic. I feel very lucky that I didn't have a reading slump after finishing it, because it's one of those books that when you close it, you just kind of sit with it for a minute. And honestly, I wanted to hug her. I really wanted to hug Hanya Yanagihara, because I personally have experienced a lot of emotionally difficult things in my life. I will say I have not experienced anything to the extent that Jude has. But I felt very connected to the way that she chose to unfold his experiences, and the way that she would incorporate the people around him for him to share bits and pieces, or why he would be, you know, caged off from what they wanted from him. It was beautiful for me to experience. I don't really know what else to say from that. It has literally every trigger warning in the book. I literally, like, just all of them. Death of a loved one, physical, emotional, mental abuse of a child, intimate partner violence, suicide, self-harm, spiritual abuse, and then maybe some of the less conventional ones, like medical hardships, like in detail on the page. I think that's something that's not often talked about, and I think that's important for people who maybe suffer from chronic illnesses. I know sometimes it can be hard to read about someone who's dealing with something chronic, even if it's not the same thing you're experiencing. Just hearing them deal with that can be difficult. So I also would put a trigger warning for that. But basically, it follows these 4 classmates who went to school in like Massachusetts or something, and now they're living in New York. And when the book opens, it's them after college, kind of struggling as they get there, and we just follow them literally until they're like 60. Things happen to each of them. You've got JB, Jude, Malcolm, and Willem. Willem and Jude are super tight, and then JB and Malcolm are closer out of the 2. They kind of group off in 2s like that, but they're all 4 friends. Malcolm is a architect, JB is a incredible painter, Jude becomes a lawyer, and Willem is an actor. And it's really interesting to watch them just navigate adulthood, their passions, their struggles, and to see 4 friends, at the very least, stay connected to one another for decades. I know for me, it's hard to imagine that. I have a couple of friends maybe that I could think like, yeah, I could see myself being friends with them in like when I'm 60. But I think as a young person, it is kind of a hard thing to imagine for that long, especially it being a nuclear group and not, you know, one-off people in your life. So for me, that was a really beautiful thing to watch happen, even though it was not, you know, the Instagram filtered versions of their lives at all. If anything, we only saw, for the most part, just these awful things that would happen to them, but then the way they would support each other, whether or not they would grow through it, being loved through it even if they didn't feel like they deserved it, just all of these things. And I don't know, I highly recommend it if you have, you know, a strong enough constitution to get through it. I would recommend reading or looking at some people's other reviews. There are plenty of videos on YouTube of people who've done non-spoiler, longer reviews of it and why they thought they would enjoy it or not. But as someone who consumes a lot of difficult content outside of reading, I didn't have a problem reading it at all. But I mean, to each their own. So I would recommend, you know, seeking out some other reviews of that, just to, you know, maybe from people you know are like-minded with you, because it's definitely not a book I would recommend to everyone. But I would say if you're ready for that journey, and it is a door knocker, it's like 750 pages, but it is well worth that ride to me. And the last book I read was very different. It was The Other Misses by Mary Kubica. She is best known for writing The Good Girl. This was a thriller that I ended up giving 4 stars on Goodreads, but I would say it was really like a 3.5. Mary Kubica is one of those authors that, like, I'll read 80% of her book and love it, and then that last 20% I'm like, make it make sense. Like, it's almost like her editor said, you need to zhuzh this up, go spice this up. And she does, but then doesn't edit the beginning 75% to make the last 25% make sense. But I still enjoyed my experience with it, but it just felt like a mediocre thriller read. It follows Sadie and Will Faust. They're a couple who leaves their home in Chicago after some weird experience or terrible experience happens to them, to a small town in Maine, and their neighbor Morgan gets murdered, and it kind of rocks everyone because their island where their neighborhood is only accessible by ferry for certain times of the day. So like whoever did it would still be on their island until morning. So it's just this like fear that they had of like, holy crap, not only is this woman dead, but that person is still on this island. And so obviously people are like, oh, well, did the husband do it? But he's like not even home while it's happening, and that's not really a spoiler, it's in the very beginning. And then the island's cop is kind of weird. Her husband was going to marry someone else before he married her, but his fiance had passed away. Again, not a spoiler, it's right in the beginning of the book. And so you just kind of get these weird vibes, not only about their family, but just the whole island. And honestly, that island felt like its own character. And that is one thing I can give Mary Kubica, is I feel like she's very great at creating atmosphere, but her plot work could use a little work. But again, I enjoyed it. It was the last book I read in July. It was very easy to read. I literally read it over the span of 2 days at probably 4 hours each day. Incredible. So I gave that one, like I said, 4 stars on Goodreads, but really 3.5 stars. And that was the 14th book I read in July. And honestly, guys, that's all I've got for you. It was a very successful reading month, and I have officially finished 50 books, which means I'm only, I think, 7 books behind on my Goodreads challenge. Or no, it says I read 51 books. So yeah, I'm 7 books behind on my Goodreads challenge. So I'm hoping if I can match this for August, I'll be back on track. So we'll see. If you have any suggestions based on some of the books I said I read here, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. Would love to hear them. Or if you've read some of these, I know a lot of these were really popular a few years ago. Let me know your thoughts on them. I'm interested in maybe diving into some more Christina Lauren, so let me know if they're just as good as the Honeymooners. But with that being said, I don't really have an outro, so I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!